I think you guys heard a lot of other testimonies already from the mission trip, so I will try to cut down this stuff that you logistically heard from the other members. But my name is Jiwon from Ecuador, and this was my second time traveling to Egypt. And before going to Egypt, I felt really overwhelmed in my personal life. I felt like I had no space or time to truly prepare for any type of mission trip. And I had been going at the time back to back mission trips in and out of the country. We were starting to prepare for the fall festival and annual retreat, and I was trying to my best to keep up with the homework and experiencing God Life Bible Study. I love missions and being able to witness God using people in other lands as his ministers to spread the gospel, but I was at the time very physically and mentally exhausted. And initially, this mission trip had been marketed to me by Stephen as a trip to see Egypt and the current progress of the Sudanese refugee school. And I had seen the school when it had just started out 3 years ago. So I was curious to see all of the changes and growth. Um, so that was my initial plan coming in. And then 1 month before the trip, we had our first meeting where we found out that we had to prepare a 2 to 3 hour children's ministry, crafts, and English learning experience for the kids. And then we had another update in the plan the week that we were traveling, where we had to add another children's ministry program for about an hour and a half during Sunday service. And also, that same week, I had realized I needed to go to Berlin for a business trip and essentially refigure out my whole travel plan where I would go to Berlin for a few days and then fly directly from Berlin to Cairo to meet the team a day later. And so I think I was definitely overwhelmed, but despite all these changes, I tried hard to come to the Egypt with an open mind, and I was very thankful that we had been discussing how to be open and seeing God, how God is working, and how we can truly experience God's voice and will by coming into situations with no desire or will of our own. And I think that's all everything I learned at the time so far in the Experiencing God Life Bible Study class. So take it. But it definitely provided me with a backbone of preparation. And I think I definitely would have been a spiritual hindrance to the team before and during the trip without it. I wanted to share two vignettes in particular within the testimony, one of which is the visit to the Sudanese refugee families. As you might have heard, we had to split into groups and paired off with one of the ministers there to hand out food to the families. And Stephen and I were paired off with Yusri, and we were interestingly the only group that had visited non-Christian Muslim families. So this visit was in part handing off food, but the other part uh, spreading the gospel and having this conversation with these families. So we visited two families. One family was a mother with 4 kids, and the other was a mother with 6 children. Both husbands had died in the war and killed in the war, and the families, while thankful that they could escape the war, struggled to make ends meet in terms of food and basic living situations. With the two families, obviously Stephen and I couldn't speak the language, so we were more or less silent observers to Yusri and as he preached the gospel. And despite the language barrier, we could see that his passion and fervency as he took the time to explain who Jesus was, patiently answering questions from the mothers about the differences between Jesus and Muhammad, between our God and Allah, that there was only one God and so forth. Yusri had spent the whole day, just to give you context, with the other ministers preparing food bags, which were about maybe 10 to 15 pounds each, following up on his other ministries and then driving us to the two families. We spent 20-ish minutes with each family, one of which he and us, but he's kind of heavier set, so it took him a harder time walking up 5 flights of stairs. We drove back to the school where the women were starting to gather. I saw Yusri go into the bathroom for just a few minutes to quickly wash his face with water, and then, with his face still dripping wet, he proceeded to give a 25-minute message to the women gathered before asking our help to hand out the food. Seeing Yusri's passion and his urgency to preach the gospel despite his tiredness reminded me of what one of the missionaries I spoke to the day before said to me. He said, people often in the mission field can continue their ministries despite any circumstance because in a land like Egypt where Christians are sparse, every heart that turns to God makes their heart tremble with excitement and anticipation of experiencing God working. The ministries that served these refugees were not rich, they weren't well off. Actually, one of the CM teachers that helped us translate for the Sunday service actually was one of the women that came for a food bag like that day that we helped. So I had no idea that she herself was in a situation like that where she needed the food for her entire family. Seeing these ministers serve their neighbors that are not from their land for the God that they love with all their strength, all their heart, all their soul, and all their mind truly humbled me as we minister here in Dallas. Out of their comfort, out of their means, while solely trusting in God. Incomprehensible by normal standards. And that's when you know it is truly God working. It made me think, could I do that? Or could we as ANF do that? Could I serve others when I am hungry myself, when I am struggling myself, when it is not most convenient, but with the heart and love of our Father towards others? The second vignette is during the Wednesday prayer meeting that many of the others talked about that we visited. I couldn't help get teary eyed during their sharing time because I knew that this was something that we also planned for our ANF a few years from now to be ascending church. They were presenting, if you recall, about their Lebanon mission trip, and each person that had gone came up and presented and gave their own testimony. Their mission trip presentation had the title PowerPoint slide that said what their vision statement was, and it said light for all nations, kind of in their translation. And for them, it was to be all nations in the Arab world, but I couldn't help draw the same comparisons to our own namesake, All Nations Fellowship. As a member of ANF, was I truly looking out for all nations in the sense that I was seeking to spread the love of God to others? Or again, was I just comfortable in my own bubble, my level of comfort, my circle of friends, inwardly focused on my spiritual life and not on the many VIPs? Overall, I think with these two vignettes, these ministers really challenged me in my own ministries here. It's not that I was feeling burnt out at all or that I felt no joy in serving. I think, like many of you guys, I felt, even before this trip, I felt like you guys that my ministries were one of the biggest sources of joy in my busy life. But seeing and speaking to each of the ministers that God was using in Egypt really humbled and shamed me. Just remembering that I was slightly annoyed and having to prepare last minute ministries for the children that once I got to see face to face, I felt God's love for them and was sad that we couldn't do more. Because of these ministers, I found myself asking, to use their words, when was the last time my heart trembled with excitement at what God was planning to do? When was the last time I felt I was performing my ministries with the intent and goal that they further his kingdom? While I love my ministries that I serve in, do I do them rather for myself, to make myself feel better, or to find the joy in the accomplishment? Or do I truly do them for God's kingdom? When was the last time I felt an urgency where each day, every hour, I wanted to and needed to serve God? Of course, in Dallas, we have a very, very different mission field and situation than in Egypt. But as PD always says, we should take each experience and challenge from God, something that we can apply into our daily lives that grow our spiritual character. A small application I had made was to think about the intent of my ministries. Sure, I had gotten to the point of finding joy in all my ministries, but I needed to reflect on what was causing me that joy. Was it a human joy, in the sense that I felt accomplishment, a feeling of belonging, or a sense of order? Or was it a spiritual joy in knowing that I was being used by God for his purpose and his will? Another application was that as a shepherd and member of ANF, I really needed to assume God's heart for my neighbors that do not know the love of Jesus yet. And going outside my comfort zone, I wanted to make sure that for my VIPs, I want to go above and beyond to show them the love and care that God has for them. Thank you.